Good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to Sylvia Topp tonight. Sylvia has done something that my mother wished had happened a long time ago, which was give proper recognition to the contribution that Eileen, Orwell's first wife, made to his development as a writer and as a person. Sylvia will be joining us from her home in Canada in Kingston, Ontario. A little bit of background about Sylvia, excuse me while I read this. She's the author of a number of essays, including Hidden Husbands, You Can't Get to Barn Hill from Here. She's worked in publishing since college, starting as a copy editor on medical journals, and then moved to freelance editing at a number of major literary publishing houses. She was a long-time wife and partner of Julie Kupferberg, a beat poet who was later the founder of the Fugs, a legendary rock and roll band. Together, Sylvia and Julie wrote, edited and designed over 30 books and magazines, including As They Were, 1001 Ways to Live Without Working, and Yeah magazine. She latterly joined the staff of Soho Weekly News and The Village Voice before ending her career at Vanity Fair. Eileen is her first book, and it's been a spectacular success despite all the handicaps that COVID has put on it. We managed to do one bookstore promotion at the very famous bookshop in Oxford before COVID brought it all grinding to a halt. So Sylvia, let's just share the screen and move to the first question.
Well, let me just say first, Quentin, how excited I am to be here and to see everybody and to be able to talk about the paperback edition of the book. As some of you remember, it's exactly a year ago in March that I was over there on this book tour, and we were just beginning to hear about COVID, and some of us were squished into an elevator going down into a mine without any masks on. We hadn't heard about masks yet. And then a few days after that, I had to rush back to Canada and unfortunately stop my book tour. So I'm glad the paperback is out, and I'm happy to have a conversation with Quentin about it.
Very good. What inspired you to write about Eileen, and was there some other influence that prompted you?
Well, I believe she's one of the most important literary wives of the 20th century, and she's been completely overlooked, as many wives had then and still are, actually. I was kind of shocked when I started looking for a book about her that no one had even written about her yet. So but first, before I even thought of writing about her, I discovered Orwell himself. And the first book I read of his was Keep the Aspidistrophine. And I really loved that book. And I like Gordon in it. I like the idea of avoiding the money god and finding a different way of living. I liked Rosemary. A lot of people don't admire her, but I thought she was quite an independent character, especially when I was in my 20s. And then, of course, when Orwell wrote it, she decided to have a baby without being married. And she was very funny and intriguing in that book to me. So then I went on and read everything I could find of Orwell's, all his novels, all his essays, biographies. And Eileen popped up a little bit, but there was very little about her. But everything there, I could see she had a sense of humor and I was, like I said, I was intrigued by her.
Let's let's move on a bit. What did you learn about her background?
Okay, well, I just didn't finish quite with the idea of how I got to writing about her. I was working with Christopher Hitchens at Vanity Fair, started in about 1999, and he was he had a monthly column, and I was one of the people who worked editing it. So I discovered, got to know him pretty well, discovered that he was an Orwell fan too, and we went together in 2003 to the 100th anniversary of Orwell's birth. And so around 2009, when I did get the idea of trying to find more about Eileen, I got in touch with him. And he said there wasn't a book about her. And he said it would be an excellent idea if I wrote it. So that's what really started me.
Very good. So her surname was a shock to see, which is a somewhat Irish name, I would suggest.
Yeah, so that Eileen's Irishness was one of the first things I got interested in. They talked about her Irish humor in the books. And her father, so her name I thought was delightful too, Eileen O'Shaughnessy. And her father was barely mentioned in any of the biographies because he died in 1929. So before Eileen had met Orwell even. I discovered he was born in Ireland and didn't get to England until he was 19 and started working in the Customs Department. And he worked his way up until 1905 when he became the head of Customs in South Shield, just about 2 months before Eileen was born. And his family here has this other, the father's sister, Eileen's aunt, also was growing up in Ireland. And she was 19. A woman from Texas arrived and was looking for Irish Catholic girls to take back to Texas to an organization she was setting up there. So Eileen's Aunt Margaret went off to Texas, and there she is in the picture. She rose to be Mother Superioress in Texas, and I thought this very elegant picture of her with glasses on. She looks like Eileen to me, wearing glasses like Eileen did. And that's the only picture of Eileen's mother. Big pardon?
Her face looks very, very similar to Eileen's.
Yeah, you see that too, yeah. And that's her mother in the other picture. Her uncle, the father's, all of the father's family became quite prominent people. And one of the uncles was a well-known journalist in London around the turn of the century. And I always loved history anyway, so I decided to give a chapter to that book, although I tell people you can skip over it if you're not interested in that.
Right. Well, what is very obvious to anybody that does any research, and you did an enormous amount of research on Eileen, is that she was not only intelligent but well educated. What would stand out for you about her education?
Well, I was impressed. Her father and mother both wanted her to have a good education. Her brother, of course, also, but their daughter, they were very particular about her. Eileen's mother had been a teacher herself and hadn't married the father until she was 34. So she'd been a working woman until she was 34. And they sent Eileen to this private high school. They had quite a bit of money, the family, in a town about 10 miles away. And she rose to be the ace student there. That plaque shows, that she was on her way to Oxford. So There, okay, and then we have the picture, two pictures I found of her when I was a week in Oxford doing research. I found these two wonderful pictures, class pictures. The one on the left, around 1925, nobody's ID'd in it, but I've asked a lot of people and I studied it pretty carefully. And I think the two we have circled, they're both in my book, are her friend Nora, her really good friend there, and Eileen. And the one on the right is ID'd as Nora and Eileen. A lot of people who look at this tell me it can't possibly be Eileen, but I think she's had a very modern haircut there, and she's wearing her glasses. That the only picture with her in glasses that all her friends said she was nearsighted. So I was really happy to find that picture. And let's see, so she got her education there. She got a second class degree in English. She learned how to be a good editor. And that, of course, went on to be how she helped Orwell in his writing. Actually, another important thing is one of her tutors was Tolkien, before he became famous himself, quite a few years before he became famous himself. And he was one of the 4 male tutors who gave her her final exam at Oxford. And they decided together to give her a second-class degree instead of the first-class degree that she wanted.
Well, curious coincidence. His daughter taught where I did my degree.
Oh, wow. What was she like?
Well, it's a bit awful to say it, but like a hobbit. I didn't meet her. I mean, I saw her, but I had no contact with her because she taught on a different program to mine. So all I can say is she was, it was a very short little dumpy lady, and that's a terrible way to describe somebody, and I apologise, but I don't know how else to say. What was she like?
Probably brilliant.
One of the features of Eileen's life, as I read it, is that she was both loyal and had a number of important loyal friends over the years. Would you like to tell us a bit about each of these 3 ladies?
Yes, well, Nora, like I said, was the one she met in Oxford. She roomed with her. That's how she met her. And they became very close friends. And by some miracle, 6 letters that Eileen had written to Nora didn't become public until 2005, I think, after all the major biographies had been written. So the biographers, who were all men, by the way, didn't have the benefit of those letters. And in those letters, Eileen tells Nora all kinds of details about her own illness, her relationship with Orwell, their travels together, her troubles at the cottage. So that was a really important part of my research. And then Lydia became a little bit of a controversial friend. She met when she was studying for her MA in psychology. And I discovered a book that Lydia had written later, which gives all kinds of details of their meeting and the psychology course they took. And they met almost a year before the 2 of them met Orwell at this party where
was she studying child psychology?
Beg pardon?
Where were they studying child psychology together?
Oh, in London at UCL.
Yeah.
She was studying for a master's.
Yeah.
And then, well, you met her, right, Lydia?
Well, yeah, I have childhood memories of Lydia. Lydia used to come to Gwen that's Orwell's sister-in-law. She married Eric O'Shaughnessy, Eileen's brother, and she's my aunt. And when my father died, we lived at Swaffham, where Gwen was practicing as a doctor, and Lydia used to come quite often. And as a little boy, she made me feel very important because she gave me an IQ test and told me I was very bright, so I was hugely flattered. And as I grew up, I learned a bit more about her, and she wasn't quite the person I thought she was as a child.
I know Catherine had a bit of trouble with her. I asked Richard recently. He said he must have met her, but he doesn't have any memory of her. But she went on to be a practicing child psychologist, which is kind of surprising. And then
what she was doing when I met her as a child.
Yes, and Lettuce she met at the Ministry of Food, and they became really close friends. She became a better friend even than Lydia, and she was at work when Eileen would come in, when Animal Farm was being written. Eileen would come in the morning and tell her how the plot was going the night before when she and Orwell were working on it. And Lettuce said she could tell right away it was going to be a great book. And she knew Eileen was very excited about it. And one of the very last letters that Eileen wrote that we have was to Lettuce just before she died.
Well, before that, of course, it's the famous meeting in Hampstead when there's a party of people from UCL to which Orwell was invited because it was his landlady who was hosting the party, and that's how they met, wasn't it?
And the rest is history, as I say. Yeah, he immediately fell in love with her, and she wanted to marry her within a few weeks. He told his friends right away, that's the girl I'm going to marry. And she fell in love with him quite quickly, too. She agreed to marry him after a couple of months. And indeed, a year later, they were married and they set up in the cottage there, the picture of the cottage. It was very much her idea, as well as his, to have this experimental life in the cottage. She wrote about it herself, how the problems, I guess, there, but she always did it in a joyful way. And they set up their own garden. They had goats and chickens. They ate a lot of eggs. And whenever very often, they would go to London. It wasn't like they were just starving there. They could go to their family homes and eat as much as they wanted, and they did that. And Eileen's brother was still, Eileen was still working on her brother's book, editing her brother's book, so he would come and take her off to London fairly often. And she was also still working on her master's in psychology. So during those 6 months, she was in London working on that too.
It was a wonderful house.
One of their goats.
Rick describes it as having wall-to-wall running water.
Yeah, they had some problems with the fireplace and the outdoor privy and only cold water and no electricity and no phone. Yeah, it's pretty rough.
It was a little bit different when we had to flip there a couple of years ago now, isn't it? Summer 2019. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go when you visited the house.
You remember going inside it and how low the ceilings were, you know? It was like, in this picture, the door is at the front and it's a very short door to get through, apparently. But now the door's in the back. But the downstairs is so, the ceiling is not even 6 feet tall. So Orwell had to be crouched over the whole time they lived there. Upstairs, there was a lot more room, but not downstairs.
During this time, of course, he went to do the research that became the road to Wigan Pier,
Yes.
and then set off for the front. And Eileen did all the final editing of the road to Wigan Pier. He was quite happy to trust her to prepare it for publication.
Yes, yes. So even after those 6 months, he was already trusting her choices. He gave a formal letter to his agent saying, you know, any changes that have to be made, her decisions would be exactly his. So that was important.
And here we have her at the front, but she wasn't mostly at the front. What was she principally doing when they were together in Spain?
Yes, I think you know that answer to that. So Orwell's commander was Quentin's father, George Kopp. And there was a lot of time when he seemed to be in Barcelona when Orwell was out at the front. And Eileen, of course, got to Barcelona herself about 2 months after, like early in the spring of, or maybe in February of 1937. And so she would be going out to dinner and drinks with George Kopp while Orwell was out on the front. So I'm pretty sure they had an affair. A few people in Barcelona think so. There isn't any absolute, but she does say she felt guilty, and as you know, he married Gwen's sister, right? And they became, the two couples were always close friends. They lived together, lived very close together in London. And
yeah, when Orwell got bombed out, they moved to Canonbury Square, where my parents were at that point, and earlier in 1945, my elder brother Stephen was born.
Yeah. Yeah. Who was a little older than Richard, I think.
No, a little bit younger. Richard was May 44 and Stephen was February 45. So when Eileen died, among the people who helped to look after Richard was my mother.
Yeah, right.
So we then, when the Spanish War was over and he came back, the big centre for the family was this lovely house which overlooks Greenwich Park on Crooms Hill, where Gwen had her GP practice, and where Eric was when he wasn't working at one of the major hospitals.
Yes.
So who do we have?
This was the house, of course, that.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Carry on, please.
This was the house that Eileen was living in with her brother's family when Orwell was courting her. So it's quite a fancy house there. They would go horseback riding and skating together. And in the house, her brother Eric and his wife Gwen, both doctors. Gwen had her visiting office, I believe, in this house, and there were servants, and they would, when they were at the cottage, you know, this is where they would take their breaks. They would come down and stay with this family. And Eric O'Shaughnessy was a tuberculosis specialist.
Well,
his and Eileen's father.
He was a heart specialist more than TB, but he had all the contacts with people who specialised in TB. That wasn't his own. He was heart and thoracic, so he obviously had. But he was a surgeon rather than a physician.
Yes. But his father and Eileen's father had died of tuberculosis, so I think that was some part of his interest in the disease also. And he, of course, helped Orwell in the huge event he had in 1938 when he had to be rushed to the sanitarium when Eileen was alone with him in the middle of the night in the cottage, and she had to arrange to get an ambulance to take him away. So I think she clearly saved his life at that point.
No, I have any doubt about that.
Eric was supported like Orwell. Eric was the whole family was socialist. Eileen's family was socialist. And Eric had spent time in Germany with his book writing. And he knew all about Hitler. So he supported Orwell's wanting to go to Spain. And he supported him as a husband for Eileen. Their mother, not so much so. She was against it at first.
But Gwen drove medical supplies out to Eileen, didn't she?
Did she?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, she certainly was a great help in many ways for them. Yeah.
So it's easy for people to view Eileen as subordinate, if you like, to Orwell's wishes, but you view her differently.
Yes, I do. I don't see her at all as a sort of downtrodden wife that he was in control of and forcing to type his work and keeping her away from friends and monopolizing her. I believe she was the first one to actually see, maybe, one of the first to see Orwell's talent. And she had the ability, her editorial ability, her insights in psychology, her political background to assist him in his writing. And that suited her as a career. She kept working. She always had her own job throughout the whole time. But she saw his genius. And I want her to be admired for her choice. I don't think we should pity her in any way. I think we should admire the choices she made. Even, David Taylor, one of the biographers, I have the quote from him. He said, she was definitely a person in her own right. And I agree with that completely. So she was teased Orwell. There's lots of examples of her teasing him. They argued, they had very strong discussions that at one point he calls a merry war, but she wasn't afraid to talk back to him or to criticize him either. And she had her own social life. She kept up her own social life. So I don't think she falls into that category.
And how did they work together on books?
Yes.
For example,
they did.
These two being very good examples of it.
Well, Animal Farm, I think a lot of people agree, even back then, biographers agreed that that there was her influence in Animal Farm, but I see it in all of his books, starting with Aspidistra, but I think also in the Spanish book and from then on. And she, I just think that she was overlooked, partly because she died before he became famous. I think that's important. But wives weren't really given credit back then. Nowadays, a lot of wives, people are discovering wives at last. But even now, there's lots of wives who are downtrodden by their husbands. I don't think Eileen was one of them. And she, let's see, I had a quote.
What sort of things changed in his writing after they got together?
Well, her insight into psychology, he was very much against psychology. He laughed at psychology in Aspidistra. And later, someone who was reviewing Coming Up for Air says it was his first book where he actually had some psychological insight in it. But they were married in 1936, and many of, or maybe all the biographers notice a change in his writing in 1936, but they just don't recognize that it could be Eileen. I had a quote from Richard Rees, who's one of Orwell's best friends, and he said, there was such an extraordinary change in both Orwell's writing and his attitude in 1936. I just can't understand it or explain exactly what happened. So he wasn't able to think that maybe Eileen,
didn't recognize he got married.
could do about it, yeah. And some of the other biographers do, even Crick, says there was a change in his writing which might have been influenced by Eileen. So they mention it, but they just mention it in passing as not very important. So I think, I hope my book will show that she was very important.
The normal pattern, as I understood it, was that he'd write something up in a rough form, and then she'd type that and make notes on the back of each page of her, which became her contribution to it, things she thought he could change or improve or look at differently. Yeah. So it was a sort of,
yes,
dare I say it, an interactive process between the two of them. It wasn't entirely him working on his own, although clearly his was the major contribution.
I'm sure that happens with many wives or partners. But yes, she specifically says in a letter to Nora that she types his drafts and writes back what she calls emendations on the back of the typed pages, and then they discuss her suggestions, and he takes them very seriously. So that's recorded, that's common knowledge by now.
And then the big change in their lives. Our patron arrives on the scene. Tell us a bit about that.
Beg pardon?
Tell everybody a bit about how it came about that they adopted Richard and
Yes.
how that affected their relationship.
First, they wanted to have a baby from the very beginning. They expected Eileen to get pregnant right after the marriage, and they were quite disappointed. And she writes to Nora a few times about that they're trying very hard to have a child, and they tried for 8 years until they adopted Richard.
I'm sorry about losing Sylvia. I'm not quite sure what's happened with, almost snipped a wire across the Atlantic somewhere, perhaps. The building on the left is Fernwood House, Jesmond, in 2015, on the anniversary of her death. We took an Orwell Society visit to South Shields. We saw where she was born and lived, and subsequently where she died and was buried. Fernwood House then was owned by the bakery group Greggs, and they made us very welcome. It was very interesting. Everybody was trying to work out which was the room that she was in, that she wrote her final letters from before, sadly, she died on the operating table. A lot of unanswered questions about how that happened and the role of the surgeon, which we'll probably never get to the bottom of. I would like to say at this point, thank you very much to Brian, who lives not too far away from the grave, who has done a wonderful job since we were last there, putting a little plaque on it explaining more about Eileen, looking after it, getting rid of the very invasive weeds, not only on that grave, but also the adjoining ones. So it's now kept immaculately, and that's wonderful.
On the question of the room, sorry, this is about the last letter that Eileen wrote. Yes. And we're talking about Ferndean House, and I think Sylvia can probably clarify this, but her room was on the ground floor and it was overlooking the garden, because she describes very poignantly the scene of these tiny white flowers in the borders, and the daffodils coming up, and it's, you know, it's marked by the spring, really, this kind of time of year that we're in now. March was March 25th or 28th, wasn't it, was when she died. And that's all I was going to say, that at Ferndean, it would have been one of those ground floor rooms overlooking the garden at the back. That's sorry, that's all really.
Yes, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Okay. I did my best to finish your slides while you were somebody snipped the cable.
No idea what happened, and when I tried to get back in, it said that you had cut me off. So I don't know what that was. I had to go back and register again. But yes, some of us went and visited that house, you know, and yes, definitely she had to be in that ground floor room looking out that window at the daffodils. Yeah, very tragic. I did want to talk about that was the hardest chapter for me to write, you know, because of all the horrible decisions they had both made, you know, that year about the operation, how she had decided to get the cheapest version, you know, and not go to London and not get fattened up and whatever they wanted to do with her there. She didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. And if her brother had been around, like I said, he would have taken care of, you know, he would have looked after her better. And she lied to Orwell that it wasn't a very serious operation. She knew it was because she made her will, you know, but for some reason she didn't tell him the truth. And he decided to believe her. He shouldn't have, of course. He could see how ill she was, but very tragic time.
Right. Ian, would you like to ask your question?
Jason has been waiting.
Yeah, unmute yourself, please. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is one really to you. In my book on the interwar ILP, I did mention in passing George Kopp as, you know, the commander of the ILP contingent in Spain.
Yeah.
But what I don't know, what I'd be interested to hear from you, is what happened to him afterwards, and in particular, what view he took. I mean, what Orwell, of course, joined the ILP in 1938 and left.
Can I be awfully rude and say next month's George talk is his biographer Mark Mildermish talking to me about my father.
So well, I'll save it till then.
You'll get your answer then. So I don't want to cut you off, but if people
that's terrific.
People got questions to ask Sylvia.
No, absolutely. I only ask because
no. I'm very happy to answer it next month.
Disappeared.
Yeah.
Mute.
Jason, did you want to try again?
No, because we've moved on really. But I will, Sylvia, I wanted to ask you something, because you mentioned the phrase "a merry war." Was that Eileen's phrase?
That's in Keep the Aspidistra Flying.
Oh, no, that's right. I wondered if she used that, because that was the name of when the film transferred to the United States, they called it that.
Yes.
And I thought if Eileen had coined that, that was a tiny little triumph. But maybe she didn't. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't.
She might have.
She might have done. Yeah.
That book. But definitely they were having arguments already about that he chose to call a merry war rather than a, you know.
They had a merry war anyway, didn't they? Yeah.
Indeed.
The other question I was going to ask, because we've moved on from her death, so it's not relevant anymore. So
who would like to ask a question?
I would. Oh. Hello, may I ask a question?
Yeah, Peter, please.
Yeah, I wonder what, thanks very much, Sylvia, for the talk. And I wonder, though, whether you could say more about what was Eileen's attitude towards having an open marriage? And also, I mean, how common was that quite a sort of radical step? Or do you think people had, in effect, open marriages, but without declaring that? But I mean they seemed to be quite open about having an open marriage, but George seemed to take much more advantage of it than she did. But I wonder, would you have a sense of what she felt about it? And also, you know, was that a sort of routine thing, or was it being quite radical for the time?
I don't think it was that routine, except for men, of course. You know, men of that social status always had mistresses or girlfriends or something, but usually not the wives. Orwell himself said many times that he wasn't a jealous person at all. So he handled the whole thing with George Kopp very well. He didn't get angry. He still stayed friends with Kopp, even though he knew pretty well. He knew Kopp was in love with Eileen, at least, and wanted her to leave Orwell for him. So how was Eileen about that? She said somewhere in a letter that she thought it would be better for him to have an affair with one of the girlfriends, just to get it over with, you know, just so that he could get it out of his system, you know. And she, of course, let him go to the prostitute. No, she wasn't actually, I did more research on that. She wasn't a prostitute at all, but that's a long subject in Morocco. She was probably the daughter of the innkeeper, but I've done a little more research on that. But she agreed to, you know, he begged to see that woman, and she agreed and didn't write too much about that it was agonizing for her in any way. And she seemed to have the affair with Kopp in a very cheerful way, you know, so.
Of course, our knowledge about what Orwell was doing has quite recently increased, you might say, or we've become much more aware of his affairs. Do you think it's changed? Has it changed our opinion about him?
I think he was a pretty average guy for the time, to tell you the truth. I don't think he was a very successful womanizer or any, you know, he didn't think of himself.
Quite a few. Do you think he's typical? I think that's a bit, I mean, I don't know, but I think that might be an exaggeration. I don't know what other things. Do you think that all men of his group slept around so much? I'm not so sure.
I'm not sure if some of it happened as much as people think it did. You know, I don't know how he was fitting in all these affairs with his nonstop writing and nonstop reviewing and letters and books and
Isn't it? I don't. Isn't there some sort of theory that I don't know? It's now maybe discredited that TB sort of is increases the sexual drive.
I think maybe his sister said that, but I haven't researched that. Have you? That doesn't sound. I don't know.
Maybe it's sort of an old wives' tale, or not. But I think there's a long tradition of people saying that.
Oh, really? There's an excuse for your.
Certainly, he was asking lots of ladies to marry him after she died, but that was a different motivation, I think.
He didn't do a very good job at it either, did he? They didn't want him, So he wasn't great at as a romancer.
Let's move on. Jeff Smith, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the talk. I shall definitely buy and read the book. I just sort of wondered from what you were saying, Eileen had an Oxford University education, an English degree, and George Orwell left Eton and didn't go to university, but went into the Burmese police. I just wondered whether that difference in their education affected their intellectual relationship at all. I mean, wonder whether Orwell thought that because she had the Oxford degree, that she very much had something to offer him in terms of his writing.
Yes, I agree with that completely. I think he kind of envied her. I have in the book something he says, whenever she wants to get a job or meet someone, she knows someone who knows someone, because of her Oxford background, and he didn't have that benefit. And he was spending those 5 years as a policeman that he ended up hating. She was the Chaucer expert, and Wordsworth, and he, didn't have her background at all. So yes, I think he appreciated her skills in editing for sure, and kind of envied her education.
Thank you.
Masha.
Let me unmute myself. Hello. Thank you very much for the talk, Sylvia. I just wanted to attract Quentin's attention. There is a question about Eileen's operation generally. Christopher Burt, I think, there in the chat, but somewhere further up. But before that, I'll ask my question and just ask Sylvia to say a few words about Eileen as a letter writer, because basically this is something that we can all enjoy, wonderful, witty, imaginary letters, and some of them were published after the 20-volume collection was already published in this additional Lost Orwell volume that Davison published, Letters to Nora. So maybe if you could just say a few words about her letters. Thank you.
That was what really got me excited about her, reading those letters. And the biographies didn't really show very much of those. The complete Orwell, of course, that's where I got to read the letters to his mother, to her brother, to Orwell's agent, to all the different people that he was working with, and I discovered all the ones at Ministry of Food too, where she had her very important job there and was handling the recipes that they were helping British people, learn how to cook during the war. So yes, I would hope that somebody would be interested in a collection of her letters. I think it would be a wonderful idea. It's full of her humor. I was just reading them before this talk to see if I could come up with a sentence or two, to read, to just give the flavor of what she, and I put 2 in my book. I put 2 complete letters in my book just so people could see, because I was doing extracting from them. Yeah, I'm glad you appreciate them too. Nice to see you, Masha. It's been a long time.
Sorry, Masha, did you say Christopher Burt had a question?
What do we know about this operation that Eileen underwent in Newcastle? What was she suffering from? What was it designed to treat?
Well, it was a hysterectomy, as it turned out, but she'd been having this heavy bleeding all through her life. and nobody could diagnose what it was. And we still don't know. I don't know if you've seen my book, but I did get the autopsy record, and it's quite tragic. You know, if you've just read biographies, it just said she died under the anesthesia. But in fact, she was actually in the operation. They were dripping the anesthesia on her, on a rag on her face, which is, I guess, how they did it in those days. And the doctor had already lifted her uterus out and was about to cut it off, I guess, whatever the operation is, when her heart stopped.
Sorry, I missed that. Say it again.
When her heart stopped, just as the operation was being performed, and they had, it literally says they were holding the uterus, and then her heart stopped. So they started for 40 minutes to give her whatever they had in those days, you know, the massage and some shots of things, but they could not get her heart to start again. And the doctor just disappeared. You know, that was one of the things I was going to mention when you lost my voice there. She hadn't even seen him before she went in for the operation. She'd been there the night before, and he hadn't even come to see her. And when Orwell went to for the funeral, he refused to see Orwell. So that doctor, I don't know if anyone can do any more research about it, but the whole operation was in every direction was a disaster.
He was presumably a well-known Newcastle surgeon, so I suppose it would be fairly easy to trace the details about him.
Well, it said he had a big car and he was kind of a flamboyant guy. I did do some research into him.
Yes. But I mean, someone like that, a consultant gynecologist, presumably on the medical register, would be very easy to trace the history of.
Yes,
anyway.
I did a little bit of that. Yeah, I hope somebody would do more.
Richard would like to chip in on this subject. Rick?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, can. I think, well, first of all, thank you, Sylvia. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
I think the problem was, of course, when she went to Newcastle, had she consulted anybody in London, I think they would have taken one look at her and would have said, no, we cannot operate on you because you're not, you're simply substandard in many ways. And it might have been even more expensive. Why she went to Newcastle? Well, of course, that was her home territory. That's kind of, you know, that's why she went there.
She was also staying with our family at Grace,
yes,
just outside Stockton. As one of the family homes.
She did consult London. She knew it was, there's something, I think it says 5 months, you know, where the London doctors would want her to be in the hospital for 5 months to fatten her up. And, you know, she was anemic. It says on the autopsy report that she was.
Well, that's exactly what they would have diagnosed. And yes. Then she went to Newcastle, where he was willing to undertake the operation. However, that's by the by. I guess that's what happened then.
But she agreed, you know, she made the decision. She could have decided to spend a little more money, you know, and go to London, but she.
Yeah. Well, at that time, of course, yeah, that's fair enough. She wanted to keep the costs down, didn't she?
Yeah, but she would have been for you. She would have been there to bring you up as a mother. So that's what is.
But there's no reason to think the outcome would have been different. We just can't tell.
No, we can't. Absolutely. We're talking about letters, Eileen's letters. I think one of the most amusing ones, of course, was the round robin, or it would have been a round robin that she sent to all her friends, saying that this is the round robin that to let you know that I have just killed my husband. Do you recall that letter, which didn't actually, she didn't send out, but it is actually recorded, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they used to row, I mean, row regularly, every day, presumably, because she was my father's equal in terms of ability to argue.
Right, absolutely. Are you talking about the very first letter to Nora? That was the very first?
Yes, that's it, the letter to Nora. I'm sorry, I'm going back now to 1936. Excuse me. That she wrote to Nora saying, you know, if you don't hear anything else, this is the round robin that I shall be sending out for my friends, but I've just killed him.
Well, yeah.
Because they did round regularly, didn't they?
Catherine, you'd like to ask a question?
Yeah. Sylvia, I never understood why Mummy sanctioned Eileen going up to Newcastle, because she knew how sick she was, and she also had a premonition that she wasn't going to make it. So did you ever find out any of that?
Can I just explain to everybody who doesn't know who you are? This is Catherine O'Shaughnessy, who's Gwen's daughter. Gwen O'Shaughnessy's daughter. Sylvia.
Yes. So, hi, Catherine. Nice to see you.
Hi, Sylvia.
So, I can only figure out that Gwen just went along with Eileen's sort of strong feeling of getting it over with, because Gwen, as you say, Gwen was the one, maybe of two people who Eileen was honest with and knew that this was a very serious operation. And I wish, just like you do, I'm sure, that she had convinced Eileen not to go. Now, she was up at Gravestone with Richard and the other children. You too, I guess, of course, were there. And Newcastle was very close, so that was another factor, maybe. She wanted to get it done, over with, when Orwell was away, so when he came back, she would be all well again. But yeah, it baffles me too. I wish someone had convinced her.
I never quite understood why she sanctioned that move.
Most unlike Gwen, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah.
This is pure supposition, but you mentioned, Sylvia, that the anaesthetic was liquid, which she breathed in the gas from. I just wonder whether it was still chloroform anaesthesia, which was still being used in those days. It was stopped because it caused cardiac arrest in about 1 in 3,000 cases. And I just wondered if that possibly might have been what the cause of death was if she had a cardiac arrest.
That's a very interesting observation.
I don't recall what was being dripped. I do have that in my book. It was 2 different things that were being dripped, and I have to ask doctors about that, and they said that was the common thing then. But that would be a very interesting thing if that were true, that chloroform caused heart problems. Absolutely. I'm not sure if it was chloroform though.
It could well have been.
That's it in my book very quickly. I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to flip the pages, but I don't think I can do it quickly enough.
It'll be hard to get to.
Brian Rubin. Brian.
Hi, Sylvia. Thanks for the talk, and I enjoyed reading the biography. I was just wondering whether you overemphasise the importance of Eileen on Orwell. I know it's very difficult to make a judgment, but wouldn't we expect Orwell's writing to have changed and improved and developed and matured as he started to learn the craft of, becoming the author that he became? So, that, do you think some of your points are conjecture?
I know that's a common thought. I mean, it is being believed now that more and more wives were very important in their husband's work. And the 2 things that I would hope someone would do more research on are the politics, because he told an earlier girlfriend he wasn't interested in politics at all. And then right after meeting and marrying Eileen, he suddenly was able to quote Marx in 1936 in IOP meetings, you know. And so that could be, someone could look at the books and see his development from the first 3, I guess, 4 before he went north. And also psychology. He, like I said, in Keep the Aspidistra Flying, he makes a little sarcastic remark about psychology, but he became much more psychologically aware. Now, he could have done that without Eileen, of course, but she was right there. And I don't think it's too great a presumption that her influence, that she would have some influence on those ways. And then she could write. She was a good editor. She edited her brother's books. She learned that at Oxford. He appreciated her editing. He, you know, looked at her suggestions. So, you know, she didn't write his books, but I think she helped him improve. I don't have any, I feel fairly strongly about that, obviously.
And after that,
Chris, Christopher Angel, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Hi, thank you, Sylvia, for this talk, and thank you again for your book. It is a fabulous book, and it is a great look at somebody who hasn't been examined as much in history. And I think to Brian's question, something I wanted to ask you about was Eileen's poem that you talk about in the book, where she writes a poem, I guess it was at Oxford, about 1984. And if you just tell us a little bit more about that poem, and if there's any evidence that Orwell read it, or how you bring it up in your book.
She had it published the year before they met. She wrote it, it was the 50th anniversary of her high school, Sunderland High School that she went to. And looking forward to 1984, which would have been the 100th anniversary of the high school. So nobody has really come up with a reason for Orwell's title of 1984. You know, it's kind of a convoluted idea that he switched 48 to 84, but of course the book came out in 49. So I don't have
what to do with your results.
Obvious. We would show him a poem she was very proud of and got published, you know. That he would see it. And it has the whole dystopian feel to it. So why wouldn't she show it to him?
Who would like to ask a question? If you can use the raise hand facility. Stuart Van.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the talk. It's amazing. You come to these talks and you get all sorts of snippets of extra information about Orwell, which is fascinating. But we mentioned about she made emendations, I think it was the word that was used, on the back of manuscript suggestions. Do we have any of those, you know, are any of those in existence, or is that, you know, just what we're believing?
Well, I can answer that for Sylvia. Sylvia, you need to unmute yourself. He had a strict policy of having everything destroyed. And the only thing that wasn't is this wonderful 1984 Labour of Love that Peter Davison did the side-by-side page, in effect, translation of all the different crossings out and all the rest of it. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing else that was pre-publication that survived.
It's just a pity, because it would have been a wonderful indication of just what effect she'd had. Thank you.
And it would have been a wonderful resource for people, wouldn't
it? Absolutely.
He also threw away all her letters, and she threw away all his letters, so they were pretty good at throwing away, you know, documents that we would have
Very
loved.
convenient in an open marriage.
Well, having said that, there wasn't a lot of room for storing anything in that cottage in Wallington.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But he saved a lot of letters. He just didn't save hers.
Right. Anybody else like to ask a question?
Quentin, can I ask? First, it's been a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much indeed. I'm a newcomer to the Society, but it's been wonderful to me to hear from members of Orwell and Eileen's family. I found it absolutely fascinating, a real privilege. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you.
Quite difficult to follow the timeline. Did Orwell continue to publish after Eileen's death? And are we able to gauge the impact of her death on his writing?
Yes, well, he published 1984. That was after her death. And quite a few important essays, and he lots of letters, you know, but he got ill. He got ill pretty quickly.
Yes.
He asked at least 4 different people to marry him after Eileen died. He said he needed companionship. He needed someone to reassure him, you know. He loved having a wife, and for Richard too. He wanted to have a mother for Richard, but he was very sickly, always very sickly. And
is there any suggestion that when he no longer had Eileen to correct and comment on his work, that his work then decreased in quality?
That it decreased after that? Well, he certainly wasn't as happy with 1984. You know, he talks about it not, you know, being lacking. He does not say he wished. Well, he certainly wished he had her there to type it. You know, I don't know if you know. He sat up in bed for weeks or months, you know, typing the last draft himself because they couldn't get a typist to go all the way up to Jura to help him. And she would have been there, of course, if she hadn't died. She would have been there typing it, and he would have lived longer, I'm sure. But and she would have had some comments about that book. But yeah, there's no. I didn't look into that very closely. He was obviously a great writer from. You know, from down out in Paris and London on. So it's not like he wouldn't have been a great writer without her, but I think she helped. Maybe he learned more about editing too by then himself from her assistants.
Richard Keeble. Evening, Richard.
Hi.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Yeah, sorry we didn't meet up in Newcastle for the launch, Sylvia, but I've written a fair bit about your book and I regard it as really superb. What is your overall feelings about the kind of reviews you've received? Have you been pleasantly surprised, sort of disappointed by some?
Yes. I think the one in the London Times was great. If you see the paperback, there's quotes from a few of the reviews. The London Times one on the Telegraph and the Daily Mail, is it? Both picked it as one of the best books or biographies of 2020.
Which
and
is on the front of the paperback, it says that.
Wow.
And one of the papers gave it a 3-page spread, you know, so a lot of people liked it, but unfortunately, I was very upset about the Guardian review, which was the same one in the Observer by a woman who barely seems to have read the book as far as I could see. And it has not been reviewed in Canada or the US, unfortunately.
Wow.
No reviews at all. So I'm hoping this maybe will get some, but Americans and Canadians do read The Guardian. So that's the only review, you know, they got to read, unfortunately. So that's disappointing. Yeah. And other, you know, there's been other mentions that upset me, you know, as misinterpretations, I think, of my book. So I always appreciated your comments. Thank you, Richard.
My pleasure.
Any further questions? Yes, Martin.
Hi, Sylvia. First, love the book and thank you for your talk this evening. Enjoyed it very much. Eileen, did she try to hide her Irish identity when she changed her name to Emily? Because that intrigued me. I thought that there was something going on there.
I don't think so. I don't think she tried to. Everybody, even Orwell said she had an Irish look, you know, and her humor was always discussed as Irish. I did try to look into her accent. Her father, I'm sure, would have had quite an Irish accent. Her mother was from Norfolk, and apparently that's also a heavy accent, you know. So growing up,
for those of us who've lived in Norfolk, that rings true, certainly.
Shields has its own, you know, Geordie accent. So that would have been the one she had when she was growing up, I presume. But I've been told by English people, British people, that once you get to Oxford, or, you know, probably even in the high school, they helped her change her accent into, what's it called, the received accent.
Yeah, I think that's fairly true. One of my wife's old friends, had a son that went to Oxford, and he apparently spoke, quote, a refined form of Geordie, but that didn't last long once he got to Oxford.
It's quite amazing.
Which is sad, really, because I think regional accents should be valued.
Well, they're coming back. Jason mentioned that to me. It's okay now to have an accent, you know, a provincial accent. So that's good.
Well, certainly the BBC has a wide range of accents among its newsreaders now.
Oh, good. Okay.
Any further questions, or shall we all wend our way? Richard Hallmark. And Glenn Iverson.
Hi. Thank you, Sylvia. Two questions about Eileen. There are no photographs of her at the ILP summer school lecturer or otherwise associating with ILP, but she was very important to the ILP people in Spain. How active was she actually in that movement? And secondly, when Orwell was being hunted in Barcelona, Eileen was critical in saving him and in helping George Kopp, and had been very active in Barcelona with the ILP and their liaison with the PUM while Orwell was on the front line in Aragon. She was surely a target for the people who targeted Orwell himself.
Yes.
But they don't seem to have done it. And in fact, because they didn't, it helped Orwell escape with her.
I think it.
Can you explain? Is it simply a kind of the sexism of the people who kind of didn't notice that it was a woman who was so important, or is there something else?
No, I think she's mentioned in the Russian, you know, archives,
Yes,
wherever
mentioned.
probably. But yeah, she said, I think somewhere, and my presumption too is that they were waiting, keeping an eye on her to see if Orwell arrived, and then they could get them both together, you know. And if you see the book or other places too in Orwell's work, where when he arrives and doesn't know what's going on, she very quickly gets him out onto the street and tells him he has to stay hidden. Then she gets them tickets somehow while he's hiding for the train. And the fact that then on the train, they pretend they're just a British tourist couple, you know, and they get away with it. And that's certainly the fact that he had her there, you know, just a woman, British woman, clearly helped him escape. Yes, absolutely.
Glenn Iverson.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Sylvia. I've got your book here. When I was reading it, I kept thinking about Julia from 1984. To what extent do you think that George Orwell based Julia on Eileen?
Well, she must be part of Julia for sure. I don't think, you know, well, probably a little bit of a lot of his girlfriends, you know, took part in that character. One of the suggestions I make in the book is that the little love place that, you know, he takes Julia to is a second floor bedroom over a junk shop, you know, and I think that seems a little bit like the cottage, you know, where they had this kind of little store downstairs and upstairs was their bedroom, and that was his happy, everyone says his happiest time, you know, those first 6 months with Eileen. So I think that fits her. And also, of course, he took her into, she wasn't the only girlfriend, but she was one of the ones who went walking in the woods with him, you know, for his lovemaking. So, yeah, partly her at least.
Christina, nice to see you again.
Hello, I'm speaking from Italy this time now. Yes, I've moved. Hello, it's nice to meet you in this way, and thank you for your talk, Sylvia. And I was sorry to hear about that review, and I can sympathize somehow because I've written a PhD on Orwell's Polish reception during the communist time, which I am trying to publish. And yes, but I wondered if it happens that after you wrote the book and submitted it for publication, if there is any new material that came up.
Not that I really know of. The very last thing I got was Lydia's diaries, which one of Lydia's relatives gave me just before publication. And I managed to get some of those in, Lydia's thoughts about Orwell that no one had seen before. But no, I wish there were. There's a woman I know that Eileen wrote to, and I've heard that she has drawers full of letters that nobody has sorted through, and I was trying to get her family, the family there to look through those letters, but I couldn't ever get them to see it.
Thank you.
Well, I think we ought to draw to a close now. If there's one last question. No? Well, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much for all your questions. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. And if anybody'd like to join us with John's event on Tuesday, I'd be very pleased to welcome you. Thank you all very much.